From the heart of Cal State Long Beach, this is KBeach Radio, KBeach.org, and KBeach FM, 88.1 FM, KKJZ HD3, Long Beach, Los Angeles.
Good morning. I'm your show host, Jonathan Joestar Beltran, and it's my pleasure to be with you on this 10 o'clock hour. Today, we're going to celebrate one of the most fabulous and manly anime series to date with our esteemed guests.
Hi, I'm Kira, or Lady Stardust.
I'm Toramelle.
And before we do that, let's kick things off with a personal favorite of ours. Here is Great Days. Stay tuned in.
Before we start the show, I want to let you all know the views, opinions, beliefs, and statements expressed are not necessarily those of KBeach Radio and Otaku Hourly. They are, in fact, of the host, guest, and/or caller. KBeach Radio and Otaku Hourly hold no responsibility for the validity and/or accuracy of information. Now, with that out of the way, here we go. Proud to be broadcasting from Cal State University, Long Beach. We are KBeach.org and KBeach FM, 88.1 FM, KKJZ, HD3, Long Beach, Los Angeles. Joining you for coffee at 10 o'clock. This is Otaku Hourly, your backdoor anime hangout.
I'm your show host, Jonathan Joestar Beltran, and here with me today on the studio is my guest.
I'm Christian Wiseman.
I'm Kira, or Lady Stardust.
I'm Tora.
And today, we're going to be talking about the most fabulous and manly anime series to date, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Woo-hoo! Yes, we are gathered here, and so let's start off with talking about what is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Kira, you want to start us off?
Oh, where do I start?
I know, it's a hard thing.
Well, you know, when I was first introduced to JoJo, which was a few years ago by some of my friends at the time, they were like, it might not really be your thing. It's like these super muscular manly guys beating each other up. And I was like, I mean, it doesn't really sound like my type of thing, but I'll check it out. But it's so much more than that. And that's what I tell people who are looking to get into it. But they're like, well, I don't know. It's really violent. It's really like this or that. I'm like, okay, but there's so many comedic moments. There's just so much that goes on, or people start and they maybe watch or read part one and they're like, I'm not quite sure what I think about it. And I'm like, you just got to keep going. It gets better and better as it goes on. And especially if you're a classic rock fan, there are so many references that you will love.
You want to give us an example of classic rock references?
Oh, okay.
Some of your personal favorites.
Well, one thing that I always like to point out to people is the Pillar Men from part 2. I'm like, okay, so you've got like these four Aztec gods of fitness, right? And their names are Santana, Wham, Cars, and AC/DC. And people always love hearing about that. And then I always like to talk about, too, how the names were censored in the official subs when brought to the U.S. And the example that I like to use the most is Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. Yeah! Obvious AC/DC reference, right? And then we have Filthy Acts at a Reasonable Price.
Wait, what?
Yeah, it's Filthy. So, because it's part 7, so in the game, they just changed it to Filthy Acts at a Reasonable Price. And, of course, I don't play the game, so my friend just started telling me that, and I'm just like, that doesn't make any sense. It's not even close to Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. At least if like Killer Queen, they tried and made Deadly Queen.
But when you think about like Dirty Deeds, Filthy Acts, it's kind of genius. Or then we found out Limp Bizkit's censored name in Eyes of Heaven. And I thought it was a joke. I thought it was photoshopped, and then I saw like the actual game and I was like, wait, are you serious?
Wow. I remember when I was watching part 4, there was a bad guy, and his actual name is supposed to be Bad Company, and they replaced it with Worst Company.
Worst Company, and then everyone was making Konami jokes on Twitter.
Yeah, right?
That sounds very fitting.
That's pretty great.
Yeah, Tori, how did you come across JoJo's?
I was actually... Okay, so I started JoJo's about 2.5 years ago, I want to say now. I remember it was right before Anime Expo, and they just announced that they were going to preview the Part 3 dub. Crunchyroll was, and at the time, I was trying to avoid JoJo like the plague because all my friends liked it, and I was like that kind of kid. It's like, man, I don't want to watch things that everyone else watched.
You gotta be a hipster.
I know, right?
Yeah.
That was me back in the day. So finally, my friends showed me like this really stupid video, and then I decided to start watching it. And then I finished the first episode, and I was like, okay, I got the Dio joke. I'm done with this. So then one day I'm like, you know what? I'll just continue onward with it. And then I actually ended up marathoning the entire show in a day.
Oh my god.
So I
Wait, all animated parts in one day.
It was only part 3 was just airing at the time. It only had about 13 episodes out, so I only caught up. I only finished the 2012 anime, so I watched all of part 1 and all of part 2 in basically a day.
Jeez.
And then I waited until the Crunchyroll event, and I watched the first 3 episodes of part 3 in English, and then when I went home the next day, watched the rest of part 3, and then a week later was like, I can't wait weeks for this to come out, and I read all the manga that same year.
Wow.
I got addicted really fast to that show. I really liked JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. It like changed my perspective on what anime and manga could be because it was just so different from anything else that I've seen in my entire life.
Tell me about
Same. I was getting really jaded at the time because I felt like so much of what I watched was like, moe fan servicey stuff, and I just was over that. So
See, I don't watch that. I usually watch a bunch of like edgier things, and I was running out of like kind of like darker stuff to watch. So my friend's like, hey, this has like gore and stuff in it. I'm like, I mean, it's shonen, and I kind of like shonen because it's just easy to watch. So I'm like, I guess I'll start it, and then now look what happened to my life.
Okay, question. Which gore... I guess this doesn't apply to those of you who have not read the manga yet, because a lot of the gore is censored in the anime, but the goriest moment that made you cringe.
Ooh.
Not cartoon, like manga gore doesn't really make me cringe very much. I guess the funniest gore moment was, I think it was in part 3, where like Jotaro like barely slid his finger and then blood just started gushing out of it. That was the only thing I like distinctively remember, because I'm just like, that doesn't make any sense. But this whole show doesn't make any sense, so it's okay.
I mean, I remember, I think for me, my goriest moment that I could think of on the top of my head was when Joseph Joestar, like this is in part 3, he gets I don't know, he gets like magnetized and stuff like that. And yeah, and so he walks by, and apparently there's this guy who just happens to be like selling forks. And while he's just walking by, the forks get into his mouth, and you can see it kind of like just pierce through his cheeks and just.
Oh, you'll have another great fork moment when you read part 5.
Nice.
But speaking of part 5, I think like Metallica and Beach Boy were the ones that just made me like.
Oh man, I feel bad for Metallica, honestly. I actually, like, he was introduced, and I'm like, oh, it's Metallica. And then he just kind of like appeared and then never came back. I'm like, oh.
I mean, it's kind of the same thing with Billie Jean too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Kenny G.
Yeah. Oh man. And since you guys were talking about like the manga versus the anime, like how different is the experience?
I feel like the anime has been pretty faithful overall.
I personally like the anime better. I in general like shonen anime better than their manga adaptation. Original sources, my bad, because I like seeing the actions actually move, and just JoJo's sense of color and style in the anime just makes it a much more unique experience than just like reading through it in the manga. The manga is great, don't get me wrong. It's the material, it's what it all came from, and it's very faithful adaptation. They switch a few things around here and there, but they don't really remove or change anything, which is what makes it people really enjoyed the anime just as much as the manga, and it's just really neat. But I do recommend the anime a little bit better just because of all the color differences and just how like crazy it gets with whatever it does.
Yeah.
I mean, I tell people, like, yeah, by all means, go on Crunchyroll, watch the anime, see if it's something that you're into. But I think the best experience is when you read it and then the animated parts come out and you get to see it in, like, full color and hear the music and the voices and everything. It just makes it so, like, when Killer Queen was animated for the first time, everyone was just like...
It's so surreal. Oh
Well,
my
it was
gosh.
like a meme at first, and then the next episode came out, and they're like, "Oh,
Yeah, it's like, how did you go from this to this?
yeah." It was like a last second drawing, and then they like the next episode comes out, and it looks like this kind of like Halloween, just like terror monster. We're like, "Oh, okay, we're sorry, David Productions, please forgive us. We will make fun of you again."
Oh my gosh, wow. You know, to add in about like now I haven't read the manga. What I would say is with the anime, I think what makes it stand out is just there's so much energy to it, especially with like the voice acting too. I remember I was talking with Richard Epcar, who voices old Joseph Joestar. It's a lot of screaming, and I just love that. It's so much more energy, so much more intensity with all like the craziness that happens within JoJo's.
I love all the random English moments too. Obviously, there's Joseph, but I guess you haven't gotten to this part because you said you're up to Bad Company in the part 4 anime. But Echo's cursing in English is like the best thing ever.
And he like spells out the curse word too.
Wait, really?
Yeah. It's pretty great because it's just like, I don't know how they were able to do this because it's technically like a kid's show in air quotes, super big air quotes, but it's just like, this is really funny. Just hearing that in English too, like Kira is right. Hearing stuff that you've read transformed into voice acting is just so much more like you're just like, oh, like I was just waiting episodes and episodes for Rohan's house to burn down.
The thing that really did throw me for a loop is because all of us who played the game, I think we really got used to the game voices, and aside from the main characters like Jotaro, and I know they kept Okuyasu the same, which made me super happy because it was just fantastic. But they were changing all the voices around. Like I believe, because Koichi was voiced by a woman in the game, and then they had
Yuki Kaji.
who played Johnny in the game, if I recall correctly. So it was like, at first it was just really hard. You get used to hearing one thing, and then hearing it switched around is like, ugh. Like I really like both the anime voices and the game voices, but I think it's just like, it throws you for a loop at first because you're used to hearing one thing.
Yeah, I'll be honest, when I heard they changed Rohan's voice actor, I was a bit disappointed because I really liked his game voice actor I don't remember his name, but he voices Araragi in the Monogatari series and does a bunch of that. So like here, and then they changed him out to someone else, and I was just like, I still imagine just the game's voice in my head while he's talking. I'm just like, it's not the same. It's not the same. But I still really like it. Don't get me wrong, but it's just kind of like betrays expectations a little bit.
The discrepancy is real.
Yeah.
Oh man, you know, I've been curious because whenever I'm watching JoJo's, I'm just thinking it's super westernized and stylish. So what were some of the inspirations for the series?
Well, I know that Araki took a lot of inspiration from like Western movies, and like we were actually just talking about this before the show started, but how Clint Eastwood was an inspiration for Jotaro, and then he actually got to meet him and took a picture doing Jotaro's pose, and I was like, oh, that is the coolest thing ever. Obviously, a lot of musical influences. Like I wish I could just sit down with Araki and be like, can I look at your music collection? Fist of the North Star was a big influence. You can kind of see the art style influence in part 1. Later, just like going to Italy and looking at the art galleries and museums and stuff like that, fashion designers. There's so many influences you can see. Like I know for our JoJo panels that we do at different conventions, sometimes we had someone who is he's a photographer and he studied art and stuff like that, and he actually found some of the pose references like between classic art pieces, and like there was a Vogue cover that I think was like, there was a gyro pose that was like that cover or something.
Oh, I've seen those. They is that the guy then who just goes through like all the magazines and finds the poses and then relates it back to the JoJo panel? There's someone that does that on like I think Twitter and Tumblr. They kind of go through, so it's super neat to see like all the influences and like some of the poses in part 4. Like the big one is the Pink Floyd album cover. They're all pointing their hands up in the air like with an L. That's the big Paramount one, and it's in every opening. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
And there are certain things, like, do you ever look at something, you're like, I wonder if it's a reference to this, but it could be kind of vague, so you're not sure, and it's like because there's this one Jolene cover pose, because obviously when I was doing some of my cosplay photo shoots for Jolene, I was looking at different pose references to do, and there's this one where she's kind of on her hands and knees, and it looks very, very similar to this one that David Bowie did for one of the Ziggy Stardust photo shoots. And I don't know if that's just like me being wishful thinking. I mean, because I posted it and it got like half and half. Some people are like, oh yeah, definitely, that was definitely inspired by that. And then the others were like, not everything is a JoJo reference, you filthy weeaboo.
Everything's a JoJo reference if you try hard enough. That's my motto in life.
Really?
Everything's a JoJo reference if you try hard enough. There's also, I don't know if you've ever seen it. I found it because I am an art major and I like looking at artists draw. There's a 2-hour video of Araki drawing one of the pictures, and it shows him like looking at like fashion magazines and these like this Louvre like book of art and just using the photos as reference. I'm just like, I'm gonna start doing that.
Also, if any of you don't have the Rohan at the Louvre hardcover book, please get it. You can get it at Kinokuniya in Little Tokyo, and it's amazing.
Oh my god.
I don't own it.
We are not sponsored by Kinokuniya to say this, and it's
I'm
okay.
saying, that's where I got mine. It was like $20.
I haven't seen it there. I got the Jojo Vela art book from them at Anime Expo, and that's the only thing I own. That's not
they
the
have a
manga.
lot of like really good JoJo stuff there. Oh, but clearly, because of all, they have a reference in Rohan at the Louvre and the obvious, infamous reference in Part 4, and then in one of Araki's notes. Like, clearly he was influenced in some way or another, good or bad, by the Mona Lisa.
Actually, I'm going to the Louvre next month, so maybe I should just buy that book and take it with me and just be like, just walk around with it, and people can be like, "What are you doing?" I'm just like, "Teach me what to do."
My best friend and I are saving up to go to Italy next year, and I want to just be like Part 5 nerds.
Yeah, right. Wait, where was Part 5? Like, look, I know this is going like kind of off topic.
No,
sorry.
go ahead.
Where does Part 5 take place in Italy? I forgot and I don't remember.
I believe there's like a few different places.
Yeah,
but,
they move
I mean,
around, but
correct me
the main one I don't remember. Was it
I know
Rome
I
or
want to go to a convention. Well, I mean, I want to go to the Colosseum, obviously, for obvious reasons. But there's also a convention we want to go to called Luca Comics, and I heard a rumor that Araki himself just showed up there stealth one time.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know. It's just somebody told me that. I don't know if it's true or not, but
Google
yeah,
image search.
either way, there's amazing JoJo cosplayers there, and
I love JoJo cosplay. It's my life, especially like at the AX cosplay gathering when everyone's just doing like the Johnny Jarrow pose, which is highly not recommended.
Why?
yeah,
Because
we do.
it's dangerous. First off,
Explain what the pose looks like. I know that's hard, like on a audio format like this. Try your best.
okay, imagine this is gonna be really hard. Imagine like a tall guy carrying someone, but they're holding that person by like their butt, but their like legs are like spread across them, and they're kind of like falling back. I actually attempted to do this pose. I attempted to do this pose with someone in my painting class, and it failed really badly. But at least someone like actually like attempted to paint it.
When I do the JoJo panels, we always have a posing contest at the end. And sometimes people donate really cool prizes, like they'll donate manga books or this or that. And so without fail, 2 people will always come up and try to do the Johnny Gyro pose. And then if we're really brave, we'll have a Narancia pose, but then we always have to include the disclaimer about how Shokotan broke her tailbone trying to do it.
Yeah. I remember when I went to your panel actually at Anime Expo, and I just remember like it was down to the 2 finalists, and it was just the Jonathan just kind of took off his shirt and instantly won. It was just like, okay, the entire room was screaming. It was so great.
Did he have the muscles?
Kind of.
Yeah.
He kind of did. I have a photo of him.
Nice. We will check that out and be the judge of that. We will come back and talk about everything JoJo's.
It's not like I want you to listen to Otaku hourly or anything. Baka.
I'm your show host, Jonathan Joestar Beltran, and here with me today in the studio is a new challenger. Introduce yourself.
John Sloan. Representing the Smash Scene. Okay.
Yeah. And in front of me is
Lady Stardust.
I'm Tora.
And streaming right now is Marvin Hidalgo. Hello. And so we were just on the story about JoJo's cosplayers. And Kira, Lady Stardust, you actually did have a great story. Tell it.
Well, I didn't know we were going to tell this on air, but
do it.
But Tor mentioned did you see Dio Master, that really really hot muscular Dio? And I was like, oh yeah, I met him at a con a couple years ago, and I was talking to him and being like, okay, I'm doing good and I'm not being super socially awkward for once, right? Mm-hmm. And I got his Facebook and stuff, and I was so happy. And then I go to his Facebook and it's interested in men. I'm like, well, story of my life.
No.
I remember when I first saw him, it was I think it was last year at Anime Expo, because he moved away. Now he lives on the East Coast. And my friend knew who he was, and so we were just walking around, and I was waiting in line for the Part 3 dub premiere from Crunchyroll, and then you just see this shirtless Dio walk by, super well built. I'm like, wow.
Okay, the rest of us were waiting in the sun for hours, and they let him go to the front of the line because he was hot. No joke. They're like, oh, just come with us.
I know, I saw him in the front, because I think I was right near the front of the line, and I was just I was literally the fifth person in the line or something like that in my half of a Joseph cosplay, and I was just kind of going through just wow, and then you see this guy walk by, I'm just kind of and then I go inside, I'm like, wow, he's sitting in the front row, he must be important.
Did you use a stand to cut in the front of the line then?
Wasn't there the world I don't think it followed him around, there was a world.
I've seen some.
There's some. Yeah. Some of them are pretty great, just cardboard.
And that killer queen I show, it's becoming this meme that's going around the internet now. This killer queen, it's this pink suit, and it's just its eyes and abs.
What are you talking about? Describe it.
Yeah, I don't know how to describe it without showing you, but it's just it's this guy in this pink suit, and the eyes and abs crudely drawn on with Sharpie. And on his feet, this is the best part, he's wearing sandals, he's wearing flip-flops, and it was posted with the caption, "Deadly Queen has no weakness."
It's a poor man's Batman. It's great.
It's those guys that do cosplay just around their house, take a broom and do Goku hair and stuff like that.
It's the least intimidating killer queen. I mean, it's oh, what's gonna happen? Okay, he can't blow you up, but he can run after you in his sandals. But speaking of really, really good JoJo cosplayers, I want to give a shout out to a couple of my favorite JoJo cosplayers because I think they're fantastic. One of them who I think is listening right now is Hanyan, or Silence Drowns on Twitter. She is the most fantastic JoJo cosplayer that I have ever seen or met, and my inspiration to finally start sewing, because when my first JoJo cosplay was a crappy pre-made Jolene that I ordered off eBay, and it didn't fit me right. And then looking at her cosplays kind of inspired me to oh yeah, I'm gonna try to learn to sew, and I'm still learning, but she's done the most JoJo cosplays of any US fan, I believe, including this great one of Johnny eating a hamburger. And then the Narancia and Fugo one with a fork.
Yeah.
And then also Sporkbot, because he cosplays my husbando. So.
Hello.
I don't think he's listening, but
shout out to all the Diego cosplayers that paint their face and wear a tail and walk around. And then there was one, I don't remember who it was or what it was, but they were just literally walking around like a dinosaur the entire time.
That was probably him. He's done that, and he walked around with a coffee cup. And part of the reason Diego is my husbando is because he's a coffee fan. So
I really like coffee. This is coffee, right?
I was like, I'll give you coffee any day, Diego.
I'll stimulate your morning. Whoa! I'm sorry. So, after we mention and fangasm all over about JoJo, why don't we get into the anime series, the meat of the thing? So why don't we start off with part 1? We're going to summarize it and then give our thoughts about it. So, Tora, why don't you introduce us and summarize part 1 for us?
Okay, so part 1 is the very start of JoJo. It takes place in late 19th century England, and you follow around Jonathan Joestar, who is this pompous rich kid and kind of gets everything that he wants, and he has a really cool dog.
Dog.
I wasn't trying to say anything else. And then one day, his family gets into an accident, and only him and then we meet up with Dio Brando's dad, whose name escaped my mind. Dario Brando, thank you.
But it's not important. As Koichi would say in Dwayne version, you don't need to remember.
Yeah.
He was a jerk.
Yeah. And then you meet him, and he actually saves George Joestar and it's George, right? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. George Joestar and Jonathan's life, and then so Dario passes away, and then they inherit Dio Brando into the family. So it's Dio and Jonathan, and then they kind of grow up and have this like brotherly competition, air quotes, and then it's basically just Dio bullying Jonathan, and just kind of goes on to that, and then Dio turns into a vampire, and then turns evil, and then it's pretty great. Yeah. And then Jonathan learns magical what's it?
Hamon.
Yeah, not trying to think of a funny name, but it's just like
Ripple.
Ripple, the Hamon power, and then just kind of like goes off and becomes a hero. And I'm not going to explain the rest because of spoilers. And I'm trying to keep this spoiler free as best that I can.
Yeah. So, what are your thoughts about part 1?
It's not the worst. It's not the best.
I think it's definitely charming, but JoJo really gets going in the later parts. Like part 1 sets up the story, and it kind of, there's a lot of people who start with part 3 because as much as you tell people read or watch in order, they don't. Mm-hmm. And part 3 is kind of like the most popular. Yeah. And so people start with that. And because they haven't watched or read part 1 for background, they don't really understand why Dio is so evil and why, like, Dio taking over Jonathan's body is this big deal. And,
Yeah, because I agree. Because I remember when I was watching part 1, I was confused because I'm like, where's the stands that everyone keeps talking about? And where's the fabulous poses? I mean, you get it in part 1, but it's like, it's kind of confusing and off-putting to people. Like, oh, you start off with Jonathan Joestar, and it's like you see Jojo everywhere.
Yeah.
So. I think part 1 for me is just in general charming. It is JoJo as a whole entity. It's the fundamental of what JoJo is, and it just grows as the series goes on. So it's this nice just foundation level of like, this is what you're getting into. It's not the best thing yet. It's definitely not the worst, but it's it's the foundation level compared to the other parts that you just go onward with.
Right, and I would say with part 1, I'm actually kind of glad that it is only 10 episodes because I think if it were just in its 13 episodes, it would kind of overstay its welcome. And then after episode 10, then we move on to part 2. Kira, would you like to summarize part 2 for us?
Well, I was going to say in part 1, you get the ultimate bro, Speedwagon.
Oh, yeah.
Speedwagon did nothing wrong.
That is so true.
I forgot about Zeppeli, too.
Oh,
Zeppeli. I love the Zeppeli. Any JoJo character with the last name Zeppeli is probably one of my favorite characters.
And Dire Straits is also a thing, too. Yeah, so...
And Master Tom Petty.
Oh,
I
yeah,
was just thinking about him because they kept playing all these Tom Petty songs on the radio yesterday, so I was like,
Master.
All right.
Yeah.
Part 2.
Yeah, part 2.
Part 2 follows Jonathan's grandson, Joseph, and Joseph kind of looks similar in appearance to Jonathan. Obviously, I mean, they're related, but his personality is a lot more different. Joseph is basically a troll. And so a lot of people really, really like Joseph when they start part 2. He inherited the ability to use Hamon. We first see him use it on a Coke bottle, of all things.
Yeah.
And he's loud. He's
obnoxious.
Kind of like a jokester. It's pretty great. We also meet the grandson of Wille Zeppeli, Caesar Zeppeli. And
my first husband from JoJo.
And at first, they kind of like, they're like, you, like, I don't care about what my grandfather did to your grandfather. But then they eventually have like the ultimate bromance, essentially. And so we see Joseph develop more of his Hamon because they have to beat these pillar men because...
Which, by the way, they have the best theme ever.
Yes, Awaken My Math. I know a friend who works out to that theme, but...
Does he get ripped and do poses while he's listening to that theme?
And then you have actual, like, Nazi scientists in part 2, by the way.
Yeah.
But then Stroheim decides, like, oh, hey, we've got, like, this this stone pillar and this man that's like been, in here for like 2,000 years or whatever. Let's awaken him. Nothing could possibly go wrong. And Speedwagon shows up in part 2 as well. He's older at this point. But basically awakening the Pillar Men is a very bad idea for everyone who's on the protagonist side in this one. And they have to fight, as we mentioned, Santana, Wham, Cars, and AC/DC. So Joseph and Caesar have to train up their Hamon with Hot Mom Lisa and...
Oh my gosh. I would say with part 2, this is where I actually really got engaged with JoJo because this is the thing that I've been so hyped for.
I think part 2 is the capture point for most people. I've only known one friend of mine who he's now like caught up to the manga of it, but he actually did not like part 2 at all. And me, myself, not being a big fan of Joseph's character archetype in general. So whenever someone comes to me like, I really like part 2, Joseph's my favorite JoJo, I'm just like, Like, I like him a lot as a character and who he is. He fits the role perfectly. He matches the tone of the whole arc perfectly. I just don't like his character archetype very much. I don't like obnoxious characters.
I like it when he's just like, so, Grandma Arena, what about you and Speedwagon? She just starts whacking.
Yeah. Stuff like that is why I like Joseph, but just like his overall personality is just like, That's why I like Caesar better. Caesar's the best. He's the best ever.
Look,
next to Gyro.
Look, Bubble Boy's cool. I think Joseph Joestar takes the
You just like Zeppelis, don't you?
I really like Zeppelis.
These are great.
Really, really like Zeppelis. But part 2 is really the big capture point for most people that I know of. Like, they go into part 1 like, oh, part 1 was, was all right. And then they start part 2 and like right after like the first episode of part 2, they're like instantly sold on anything JoJo related now. They're just instantly just like I'm going for this show now. And they just catch up to like everything. So I know them. We have another friend who we talked to and I got him to watch it, and he's just like, part 1 was kind of boring, but then I saw Joseph Joestar, and I'm just sold. So he just watched it all kind of thing. So I feel like part 2 is, again, like the capture point of most people. It's still one of my personal favorites, and it still has Harmon, which is something I miss in the series. Bring it back, please.
Yeah. Please.
There's a thing that's like waiting for JoJo to bring Hamon back and you just see a skeleton.
I mean, they kind of brought it back in part 7. Big air quotes. Kind of. We'll get into that later.
I think part 2, because the other thing with JoJo is it's really, really going to mess with your emotions and your feels, if you will. And part 2, I mean, part 1 has a very sad moment where, you definitely like, oh, but part 2, it's like there is a point, and everyone knows what I'm talking about, but when people see that, it's like they cry without fail. Like, if you don't cry at that part, you have no heart.
As you can see, Tori's balling
I didn't cry. I almost cried. I was like, no way.
See, even like rewatching it, I still cry, and I'm like, I know it's coming.
Yeah, it's inevitable.
No, I was so sad. I was like, oh man, this is so great and everything, and then I'm just like, no way. Like, I kind of like almost wanted to just stop watching the anime. I was so heartbroken, and I was just kind of like, there's no way this is actually happening. There's no way this is happening, right? This is a dream.
And then part 3 happens. And then you're like, oh, part 4, okay. And then part 5 happens, you're like, oh. And then part 6 happens, you're like, oh. Just like a summary of JoJo emotions.
And then you're like, oh, there's more. And then you're like, oh, part 7. You're like, wow, part 7. That's really good.
But before we get to that, if we ever do, let's move on to part 3. And part 3 is a really lengthy one. So how about we make it a challenge? Summarize it in one sentence.
Typical shonen.
Group of gay dudes decide to go to Egypt to beat up great granddad's stepbrother.
And along the way, he encounters many other stand users. Will he ever be able to find
Steely Dan?
Dog.
You mean Dan of Steel? How dare you?
I love it because there's a sign on the door, and one sign is like, privacy, please. It's like one of those hotel room things, and the other says, ready for encounters. And I was just like, oh, like stand users.
Yeah.
This must be the work of an enemy stand.
Dio's out for us, man. He's out for
Can we talk about Polnareff?
Oh yeah.
Yes!
Why don't we just talk about Polnareff the entire time?
Polnareff
I
is
feel like
the
I'm the
best
only one
man.
here that doesn't really like Polnareff.
Okay, Kira, why don't you start off with Polnareff?
Well, I was just thinking of that whole toilet scene because
Explain to us.
well, I was tweeting a couple weeks ago about how I got really, really freaked out at work because I had my first real life encounter with a possum, and it just like jumped out and was there, and I wasn't expecting it, and I was freaking out. And then somebody was like, "Oh yeah, like we had one just crawl out of the toilet once." Oh my god! And so I was like, "Oh no, it's like a Polnareff moment." Oh, no.
Did you do the pose and everything while you were doing like?
Well, and I was thinking about how my cosplay friend that I mentioned earlier got like her Polnareff wig actually glued to her head in the hotel room, and just what an uncomfortable experience that must have been.
Because it's like basically like a log on your head, like just by the looks of it.
Oh, it is. I've
Yeah.
seen cosplayers with it, and I'm just like, I feel sorry for you guys, honestly. I don't know how much that weighs, especially since it's probably just like super hairsprayed and like glued to the max to even get it to stand up to that
Yeah.
point. So I'm just like, I praise you.
Yeah, you did what you could.
Yeah.
Now let's get back to part 3.
Punch Ghost, the introduction of Punch Ghost.
The one that everyone thinks of when it comes to JoJo.
Yes.
It's definitely the popular one. It's definitely the one that brought everyone in, and it was actually part 3 was released manga wise in the U.S. and that was the only one for until a few years ago when they decided to release the Jojo hardcover manga to the U.S. So it was the only one for a while.
They did an OVA though, right?
There was the OVAs and it was dubbed, and I watched the
And
dub.
it was so horrible.
I've only seen one episode of the dub.
Just like as a voice actress, like part of it hurts my soul, and then the other part is like, but it's so bad, it's almost good.
No,
you
the
know?
best one was like, oh, you're getting closer to Dio. I was like, yeah, I'm getting closer to mess you up. And like dramatic music just starts playing. I was like, it's the best thing ever. It's the best. I've only seen one episode of the OVA. I feel kind of bad about that. And it was like the one episode of the old lady. I forgot the stand.
Enya.
Enyaba.
I was just
Enya.
thinking about her, and I was like, you know, she should have just gotten together with Kira's dad because they're both like, my son did nothing wrong. I know my son's a piece of crap, but
Thank you, Adam Hartfather. It's like, I know my son's a murderer, but I still love him. It's like, okay.
Whatever you say, Enya.
Yeah.
You do you.
I want to talk about a little bit about part 3 because
Yeah.
as much as I love all of the JoJo arcs, part 3 is definitely my least favorite out of all of them. I think the reason why is because it's just so repetitive and it does the same thing over and over and over again. There's nothing really new that happens. Sure, some characters get absent for like certain episodes and whatnot, and definitely I don't like Jotaro as a character. I think he's really bland and boring, and he's like that cool yeah, he's like that cool laid back character, but it did, and this is where I say that I really like the anime better in terms of the manga, because reading part 3 was boring. Reading it was boring.
I don't know. There were some great moments. I remember I laughed so hard I cried at the part where I think it was Abdul who said it, who was like, no, Jotaro, Star Platinum broke Darby's finger. Yeah. It was just like so dramatic
My favorite one was the baby stand, and just reading that was just really funny to me. Like just reading, I like reading it because like he like wrote the words in English. So to me, I was just like, isn't he Japanese?
Everything about that I hate. It's like babies and like eyeball spiders and clowns. I was like, there is just nothing good about this.
Yeah, but like in my opinion, just reading it, I'm not a big reader in the first place.
Yeah.
I don't. But just reading in general is kind of hard. But still watching it, because I watched it while it was airing. So compared to probably Jonathan and John, where you guys watched it in like a marathon format, compared to me and maybe you, Kira, we watched it airing. I would just, because I knew how the episodes were, it's like, oh, part 1, part 2. So I would just I would like skip a week, watch an arc, and then just like watch it arc by arc by arc. And it was so much easier for me to watch. It was still enjoyable. I love part 3 for what it is. It's definitely the introduction of stands. We never got into that. For those of you who don't know, Stan's replaced Hamon in part 3, even though Joseph, who comes back, still has Hamon powers. Part 3 emphasizes Stans, and then they stay for the rest of the series, all the way up to part 8. It never comes back. You get Stans. Stans forever.
Yeah.
And they're basically like these manifestations of the human soul, is what they are. And they vaguely described where they came from. Part 4 explains that a bit more, which we'll get into that probably later. But stands just kind of envelop it, and they're such a unique thing, and it made the creator of it really, he has to design now 2 characters for 1 character. Basically, you have to design the stand and the character, and that was just such an artistic hurdle to overcome, in my opinion, as someone who wants to get into character designing, because creating 2 likable designs is hard for one separate being,
and then unique abilities for each of the stands.
That's true.
The video game one is the best. The Darby one was just oh yes, video games.
Oh, Younger Darby.
Yeah, Younger Darby.
Younger Darby's great. This brings, I think for me, what I love about part 3, and this is just basically with anime in general, I miss the fact that there are really, really good enemies. Because usually with anime and even just media in general, it's just oh, you have a really great hero and then a whatever enemy. These enemies are really, really good. Whenever I watch it, it's how are they going to get out of this? I remember one of them was Centerfold, where he actually can transport from reflective material.
Yeah.
And there was a situation where Polnareff and Kakyoin are actually trapped by a whole bunch of homeless people. And it was just a matter of how do we defeat the stand? And simply put, all they had to do was flip a coin to get the stand to get out.
Yeah.
And for me, I think that's what I really appreciate about part 3. The enemies are really top notch and it's great.
Mine's is Mariah. Because
Mariah's great.
One, I get the Mariah Carey reference because I read it up and I was oh sweet, there's actually some hip hop influence in JoJo. And then another thing too, I think it has one of the funniest moments where it's Avidal and Joseph are attached together, and it's seeing the reactions of different people walking by as they're trying to get
that made it so great because it's oh, that could be our reactions, but I think everyone's just kind of raising their eyebrows during those things. It's oh yes.
Help me! Oh my god! It's great.
Not to go off topic, but that was everyone on Yuri on Ice.
But back to JoJo's. Now I kind of want to bring this to part 4.
The best one. The best in my opinion.
Yeah. So.
And JoJo's creates villains that people even like. You acknowledge that they're a terrible character who's done terrible things, but you know how many people love Dio or love Yoshikage?
Yeah.
I love Dio. He's just the epitome of just pure evil, but he's so good at just being evil.
He is charismatic. I love that.
He's entertaining.
And it's, he is hot. And so it's oh, he's very charming. And, because we've all known those people who are really good looking so they could get away with not being a great person. I feel like that's Dio.
Yeah. It's true. It's true.
All right.
And then let's go into part 4.
Do you want me to explain part 4?
Yes, please.
I really like part 4. Part 4 takes place in Wario. It's a made-up city in Japan, and it's much more relaxed than slice of life. You follow around Josuke, who is Jotaro's uncle. Who's half the age of Jotaro at this time. And then Jotaro comes back as a marine biologist.
Yeah.
It's just the most odd thing I think anyone would. It's oh, he could be anything. Marine biology. And then Josuke meets up with some of his friends, makes some friends along the way, and then he basically just... It's much more laid back, in my opinion. Part 4 is very laid back and kind of introduces that, where part 3, every other stand user was evil. Part 4 is just oh, this is a stand user who uses his stuff to make his food, help other people. Then there's Cinderella, where it's oh, she gives people plastic surgery.
It's because I feel this is JoJo's take on the slice of life genre. If you want to make it more simplified, I like part 4 a lot more because it's kind of unpredictable in the sense that you don't really know what's going on. There's still a villain aspect to it. But another thing too is even though they fight the enemies still reoccur and they appear again in future episodes. So it's you feel it's a big community.
And there is that interaction between the characters because, well, I did like part 3. I feel like it kind of got to, okay, enemy of the week, stand battle, stand battle, stand battle, stand battle, and part 4, you really get a lot of interaction between the characters. I love Rohan.
Yay!
Who Araki swears is not his self-insert character.
Don't worry, we'll get into
but
more.
But he's had so many spin-offs in this and that.
Yeah, we'll get more into Rohan, maybe the best guy, after the break.
Please continue listening to Otaku Hourly.
Or else.
I'm your show host, Jonathan Joestar Beltran, and here with me today in the studio is my guest,
John Sloan.
Lady Stardust.
Tora.
And so we were just talking about part 4, and in fact, we were talking about a character named Rohan, right? Let's go talk about him. Here.
And we were talking about Okuyasu too, and I was explaining how he goes from being like menacing and then to lovable goofball, especially with the art style change. I felt like that's
Yeah.
even better.
It fits like same thing with Josuke. Josuke appears as like this menacing character, but then he's just like,
What did you say about my hair?
Yeah, I never brought that back actually.
Yeah.
But I like how all the characters kind of like mellow out as the style and the series goes on.
Yeah. And like, what I noticed when I was marathoning part 3 and then going to part 4, the art style looks really, really different. Like, not too different, just different enough.
This is when Araki started just really changing his art style, and it's completely noticeable in like part 7. But like he started like just kind of like getting rid of like the Fist of the North Star inspiration and kind of started developing his own style, and it really shows. And I think it's really like creative, and it really is his own landmark in the manga art style industry.
Yeah, I actually kind of prefer the later art style. I don't know if that's a common opinion among JoJo fans. I think a lot of them are like, oh, I preferred like the parts 1 and 2 art style, but I don't know. I really like the look that the characters got later on.
Yeah, a bunch of my friends really like the earlier style. They don't, because they like really manly stuff. So on the style change, they're kind of disappointed, but they still really like the show in general. And I also just like the newer art style. Just in general, looks a lot nicer.
I have to agree with you too, because it's like it has this very like graphic art style. Like you can totally tell. Like I know like in the openings for part 1, 2, and 3 is all like kind of 3D CG, like buff burly men going out fighting.
Yeah.
Part 4 is like kind of like an opening to a sitcom.
Yeah.
That's what part 4 usually reminds me of, is a sitcom show where it's like, oh yeah, it's like you just see these characters reoccurred, and like all you just see is that live audience, and then it's like, woo!
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that in the part 3 anime, because Iggy's design changed so much throughout it in the manga, and they actually like kept true to that.
Yeah, that was so funny to me. I was just like, it's like first he appears as like the pug dog, and then he's like his face slowly starts like mellowing out. I'm just like, wow, they actually like just flat out just copied it the way it was. That made me kind of happy too.
Nice.
Can we talk about Rohan really fast?
Yeah,
before we
let's go
have
talk
time?
about
Go
Rohan.
for
I
it.
like Rohan. The best part about Rohan was when his house burned down.
That is so
It
cool.
was so great. It's just like, I don't care that my house is burning down. I want to know how Josuke cheated.
I like how everyone likes Rohan, but then like the characters
You
themselves
don't?
hate. Oh, I mean, I'm okay with Rohan. It's just like that one part where he was playing Jakin with
John Kimpo. It's rock, paper, scissors.
Yeah, with that one kid, that was hilarious in my opinion.
I hated that kid. He was so annoying. It's like he was annoying enough in the manga, and then in the anime you have to hear him, and it's even more annoying.
Let's play John Kimpo.
Yes, that-
Okay, controversial opinion time.
Yay!
Shigechi, what do y'all think of him?
Oh my! No, because like, because like for a second, like I hated him. I really
Right?
hated him. But then like once like you get to that one part, you're like, wow, you feel like a total bad person now.
Yeah,
because of it.
JoJo just like really takes you on an emotional ride.
I know, right? Made me feel bad. I felt bad reading it because I was just like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
And then just seeing it animated was just also just kind of like all the sad music, and the introduction of Kira was just kind of like, oh.
Yes. Okay, can we take a moment to appreciate that the JoJo character with my name looks like 80s David Bowie and has a cat stand. It's just like me. Come on.
Is that your next cosplay? Is just dressing up as Yoshikage and
I
walking around?
really should. I feel like I'm always doing like Jillian variations.
You have to do
Yeah.
the poorly made Deadly Queen. I mean, Killer Queen. I'm sorry.
Deadly
Deadly
Queen.
No,
Queen.
people started calling it Deadly Queen just because of how like bad it was.
That's so good.
Prepare your sandals, Kira.
In your pink jumpsuit, it looked like a rip off of Majin Buu from Dragon Ball Z.
But yeah, I really like part 4 personally. I think part 4 is definitely a step beyond what JoJo could be. It totally just transforms, like going from like this super shonen action thing to this kind of more laid back, just kind of like, hey, we're cool friends trying to find a serial killer.
Yeah.
Oh, look, a ghost.
And it has an alien.
Yeah, it's got an alien. I love him. He's cute.
And the girl with the low blood pressure with the Cinderella stand.
Yeah. Now we're approaching our final moments here. Any last thoughts about JoJo's?
Part 7's the best.
I it's really hard to choose a favorite part. I've gone back and forth a lot. I think I would say part 6 overall. I mean, I could be biased because, you know, I cosplay Jolene and all that kind of stuff, but it's so interesting.
As someone who watched only the anime, part 4 probably was my best part because it definitely shines with Jojo.
I'm proud of you.
I know.
I'm proud of you. I'm proud of all of my friends who came up to me after part 4 and they're like, I really like part 4 better than part 2. I'm just kind of like,
thank you, Tori, for nagging me.
I will add, I think the series gets progressively more bizarre, if you will.
Oh, yes.
Right now we're on part 8, and that's just like, what?
Part 8 is definitely different. It's very different.
Yeah, and we can find all of the anime JoJo's Bizarre Adventure over at Crunchyroll.
And Viz Media.
Yeah, and Viz Media. So I'm your show host, Jonathan Joestar Beltran.
John Sloan here.
Lady Stardust.
I'm Tora.
And we'll see you all in the next Otaku Hour.